He made the same cup of coffee for the same customer every morning at 7:15 a.m. Black coffee, no sugar, extra shot. The customer never said thank you, never made eye contact, just grabbed the cup and rushed out. But when that customer collapsed in the cafe, having what looked like a heart attack, what happened next revealed why this 68-year-old barista never seemed rattled by anything and why his calm voice could guide a Boeing 737 through a storm. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this incredible story of hidden expertise and quiet heroism, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those whose greatest skills are often their best-kept secrets. But that was before the diagnosis. Mild heart arrhythmia detected during his annual medical exam at age 65. Not life-threatening, easily managed with medication, but according to FAA regulations, grounds for immediate medical retirement. One day he was Captain Foster, responsible for the lives of 300 passengers at 35,000 feet. The next day he was just Jim, wondering what to do with the rest of his life. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone whose greatest skills were hidden behind a simple job title? Someone who brought extraordinary expertise to ordinary situations? Share their story in the comments, because here at the Human Stories, we believe that the most valuable people are often the ones we overlook until the moment we need them most. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it with someone who believes that experience and wisdom can show up anywhere. We'll see you in the next story, and until then, remember, sometimes the most qualified person to help you is the one making your morning coffee. You know what I learned that day? Sandra said recently, sipping her coffee at the counter. What's that? Jim asked, wiping down the espresso machine with the same methodical precision he'd once used for pre-flight checks. That heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons. Jim smiled, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Sometimes the most important flights happen at ground level. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 30 years flying aircraft, thinking that was his calling. But perhaps his real calling was something broader, being the calm voice in the storm, the steady presence when everything feels out of control, the person who helps others find their way through difficult moments. Sandra still comes in every morning at 7:15 for her black coffee, no sugar, extra shot. But now she stays for a few minutes, talking with the barista who taught her that panic attacks don't have to be catastrophic, that there are people in the world who know how to help, and that sometimes the most skilled person in the room is the one you'd never expect. The question stuck with Jim. That afternoon, he called the Denver Fire Department's community outreach program. They were looking for volunteers to teach emergency preparedness and crisis management to community groups. Jim's aviation background, combined with his demonstrated ability to stay calm under pressure, made him exactly what they needed. 6 months later, Captain James Foster was leading emergency preparedness workshops for business groups, teaching the same breathing techniques and calm communication skills he'd used in aviation to help people manage workplace stress and crisis situations. He still worked the morning shift at Cafe Luna. Maria had made it clear that losing him wasn't an option, but now his afternoons were filled with the kind of purpose he'd thought he'd lost when he retired from flying. "You've done this before," she said. "Different context, same principles," Jim replied. "What's your background?" "Commercial airline captain. Retired." Lisa nodded as if that explained everything. "That makes sense. You handled this exactly like someone with emergency training. Ever think about volunteering with emergency services?" 3 months after Sandra's panic attack, Jim was working the morning shift when an elderly customer named Frank started showing signs of chest pain. While someone called 911, Jim stayed with Frank, monitoring his condition, keeping him calm, and providing the kind of steady presence that medical professionals value in emergency situations. When the paramedics arrived, they found Frank stable and conscious, with Jim providing clear, concise information about symptoms and timeline. One of the paramedics, a young woman named Lisa, looked at Jim with professional recognition. She was right, of course. What Jim had used that morning wasn't barista training, it was decades of experience in situations where his voice and his decisions were the difference between routine operations and emergency landings. It was training in crisis management, passenger psychology, and the kind of calm leadership that keeps people safe when everything around them feels dangerous. Word of the incident spread beyond the cafe. Rebecca, the nurse from Presbyterian/St. Joseph, heard about it from Sandra and mentioned it to her colleagues. Tom, the construction foreman, told his crew about the barista who turned out to be a retired airline captain. Within weeks, Cafe Luna had developed a reputation not just for good coffee, but for having someone behind the counter who knew how to handle emergencies. Sandra became a regular customer with a difference. Instead of rushing in and out, she started arriving a few minutes early, sitting at the counter while Jim prepared her coffee, talking about her work at the bank, her anxiety about presentations, her appreciation for having someone who understood that panic was manageable if you had the right tools. "You know," she said one morning a few weeks later, "I've been thinking about what happened that day. You probably saved my life." "You weren't in any physical danger," Jim replied, handing her the coffee. "But panic attacks can feel like dying. I'm glad I could help." "It wasn't just the breathing technique," Sandra said. "It was your voice. The way you took control of the situation made me feel safe. That's not something you learn making coffee." Over the next hour, as word spread through the cafe and the surrounding business district, Jim found himself answering questions he hadn't expected. Yes, he'd been a commercial pilot. Yes, he'd handled emergency situations more than he cared to count. No, he'd never lost a passenger. Yes, the skills transferred to other situations where calm leadership mattered. But what surprised him most was how good it felt to use those skills again, even in a coffee shop setting. For 3 years, he'd made coffee and served customers and enjoyed the routine, but he hadn't realized how much he missed the feeling of being needed for something more than espresso shots and milk foam. Maria stared at Jim. She'd known him for 3 years, had watched him handle the morning rush with unusual competence, had noticed the way he never seemed flustered by anything, but she'd never thought to ask about his background. "A pilot?" she asked. "Retired," Jim said. "Medical retirement, heart condition, nothing serious, but the FAA doesn't take chances." "And you didn't think to mention this when I hired you?" Jim shrugged. "You needed a barista, not a pilot. I needed something to do with my mornings. Seemed like a good fit." "It usually is," Jim replied. "Most turbulence looks worse than it is. The key is helping people understand that staying calm makes everything safer for everyone." Maria Santos, the cafe owner, emerged from the back office where she'd been doing inventory. She took one look at Sandra, now breathing normally and sipping water, and Jim sitting calmly beside her, and immediately understood that something significant had happened. "Everything okay out here?" "More than okay," Sandra said, looking at Jim with new respect. "Your barista just saved me from a panic attack. Turns out he used to be an airline pilot." One of the customers in line, an older man named Robert who came in every Tuesday and Thursday, stepped forward. "Wait a minute, Captain Foster? United Flight 12047, Chicago to Denver, about 8 years ago?" Jim looked up, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Severe turbulence over Kansas?" "That's the one," Robert said, his voice filled with amazement. "You were the pilot who kept everyone calm when we hit that storm. I'll never forget your voice over the intercom. You made it sound like hitting turbulence at 30,000 feet was the most normal thing in the world." "I was a pilot," Jim said simply. "United Airlines, 32 years. The confession created a moment of stunned silence in the cafe. The customers who had been watching the emergency response now understood why the barista had handled the crisis with such professional competence. "A pilot," Sandra repeated. "Like commercial flights?" "Boeing 737s and 757s, mostly. Some international routes." Jim's voice carried the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to describe the weather. "Emergency management was part of the job. Different kind of emergency, same basic principles, stay calm, follow protocols, keep people safe." "How did you know what to do?" Sandra asked when she could speak normally again. Jim handed her a glass of water and sat down across from her. "I've dealt with panic before. Different settings, same principles." "Are you a doctor?" "No," Jim said with a slight smile. "But I've spent a lot of time talking people through situations where staying calm was the difference between a good day and a very bad day." Sandra looked at him more carefully, noticing for the first time the way he carried himself, the precise way he moved, the authoritative calm that seemed completely natural. "What did you do before this?" The technique was straight from emergency training, the same breathing protocol he'd used to help nervous passengers, the same calm voice techniques he'd learned for communicating during in-flight emergencies. But more than that, it was the confidence of someone who had managed life-and-death situations and knew that panic was often more dangerous than the actual emergency. "That's perfect, Sandra. Keep breathing with me. You're doing great." Jim continued the pattern, never breaking eye contact, his voice never wavering from that calm, authoritative tone that convinced people they were safe even when everything felt out of control. Gradually, Sandra's breathing began to slow. The color returned to her face and her grip on the chair arms relaxed. The other customers in the cafe watched in amazement as this 68-year-old barista managed a medical emergency with the kind of professional competence they'd expect from a paramedic. "Sandra, look at me," Jim said, positioning himself at her eye level. "You're having a panic attack, not a heart attack. I need you to listen to my voice and follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that?" His voice carried the same steady authority he'd used hundreds of times to calm nervous passengers during turbulence. Sandra nodded, still gasping but focusing on his face. "Good. Now I want you to breathe with me. We're going to count together. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, follow my lead." Jim began the breathing pattern, his voice steady and rhythmic. In, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4. "Sandra," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority that had once controlled cockpits during crisis situations, "I need you to sit down right here." He guided her to the nearest chair, his movements confident and purposeful. The other customers in line looked on with concern, but Jim's focus was entirely on Sandra, who was now hyperventilating and showing all the signs of a severe panic attack. "I can't breathe. I think I'm having a heart attack," Sandra gasped, her eyes wide with terror. Sandra's breathing was becoming more rapid and shallow. Her face was flushed, and she kept looking around the cafe as if she couldn't quite focus on anything. When Jim set her coffee on the counter, she reached for it with hands that were visibly trembling. "Thank you, I really have to," Sandra started to say, but the words cut off. She gripped the counter edge, her knuckles going white. I can't breathe." That's when Jim's training kicked in, not barista training. Pilot training, the same instincts that had guided him through emergency situations at 35,000 feet, activated in a coffee shop in downtown Denver. "The usual?" Jim asked, keeping his voice calm and level. "Yes, but make it to go. I'm really late and I have this presentation and my boss." Sandra's words came out in a rush and she fumbled with her wallet, dropping credit cards on the floor. Years of flight training had taught him to observe everything: passenger behavior, weather patterns, instrument readings, and what he was seeing now triggered every instinct he'd developed for recognizing when a situation was about to become critical. Jim learned their patterns, anticipated their orders, and had their drinks ready before they reached the counter. It was efficiency born from years of managing complex systems where timing mattered and mistakes had consequences. What he didn't expect was how much he would come to care about these strangers who trusted him with the first ritual of their day. On this particular Wednesday morning in September, Jim was in his usual rhythm. The espresso machine hummed, the milk steamer hissed, and the morning regulars moved through their familiar dance. Rebecca got her cappuccino at 6:45 and headed back to the hospital. Tom grabbed his black coffee and muffin at 7:05, joking about the early morning construction noise complaints. Sandra was running a few minutes late. Usually she arrived at 7:15, but it was already 7:20. When Sandra finally rushed through the door, Jim could see something was wrong. Her usual brisk confidence was replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. Her hands shook as she approached the counter, and she was breathing too quickly, too shallow. "Any experience?" Maria had asked during the interview. "Not with coffee," Jim had replied, "but I'm good under pressure." He didn't mention the pilot background. Somehow it felt like a conversation that would raise more questions than it answered. Instead, he let his work speak for itself. Within 2 weeks, he was handling the morning rush with the same methodical precision he'd once used for pre-flight checklists. Within a month, customers were specifically coming in during his shift because they knew their order would be right and ready on time. The regulars developed a routine with him. Rebecca Martinez, the nurse from Presbyterian/St. Joseph Hospital, always ordered a large cappuccino with an extra shot and oat milk. Tom Chen, the construction foreman, wanted black coffee in the biggest cup they had, plus a blueberry muffin. Sandra Williams, the bank manager from across the street, ordered the same thing every day: black coffee, no sugar, extra shot, and always seemed like she was running late for something important. The pension was adequate, the savings sufficient, but Jim discovered something he hadn't expected. Retirement wasn't about money. It was about purpose. After 3 decades of responsibility, routine, and the knowledge that his skills mattered, he found himself in a quiet house with nothing but time and a growing sense that he was meant to be doing something more. That's when he saw the Help Wanted sign at Cafe Luna. The owner, Maria Santos, needed someone for the early morning shift, 5:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. Most people didn't want those hours, but for a man who had spent 30 years getting up at 4 a.m. for 6 a.m. flights, it felt like sleeping in. Jim had been a commercial airline pilot for 32 years. Not just any pilot, a captain for United Airlines who had flown everything from domestic routes to international flights across the Pacific. His logbook recorded over 20,000 flight hours, including emergency landings, severe weather navigation, and situations where his calm decision-making had meant the difference between routine flights and front-page tragedies. The customers saw him as the reliable barista who never got their order wrong, never seemed flustered during the rush, and had a voice so calm and authoritative that even the most impatient customer would relax when he spoke. What they didn't see was a man whose voice had once guided hundreds of passengers safely through emergency landings, whose hands had controlled aircraft in conditions where a single mistake meant disaster, and whose training in crisis management had never really left him. Captain James Jim Foster, though the name tag on his green apron just read Jim, had been working the morning shift for 3 years. Silver hair, neatly combed, wire-rimmed glasses that he adjusted when concentrating, and hands that moved with practiced precision, whether he was operating an espresso machine or 30 years ago flying commercial aircraft through turbulence that would terrify most people. The morning rush at Cafe Luna in downtown Denver was always the same. By 6:30 a.m., the line stretched out the door with office workers, nurses ending their night shifts, and construction crews grabbing coffee before heading to job sites. Behind the counter, one man handled it all with the kind of steady calm that made everything look easy.